There is a particular sound a human palm makes when it connects with a human face at full force. And once you hear it in real life, not in a movie, not on television, but 3FT in front of you under crystal chandeliers, you never truly unhear it for the rest of your life. I was 76 years old that night. I was standing near a tall cocktail table with two glasses of champagne in my hands, one for me and one for my wife, and I was laughing at something one of my old business partners had said about the jazz quartet. That is the last time I remember laughing without something heavy sitting behind it, because the next second I heard that sound, and I saw Evelyn, my Evelyn, stagger sideways like somebody had pulled the floor out from under her. Her reading glasses, the little gold-framed ones she had worn for almost 30 years, flew off her face and hit the marble and broke into three pieces. The jazz quartet quit playing mid-note. 400 guests went silent so fast it felt like somebody had cut the sound on the whole building. Before I go any further, let me tell you who I am so you understand why what happened next was not a reaction. It was a reckoning. My name is Henry Ward Calloway. I was born in a farmhouse outside Lubbock, Texas, with a dirt yard and a well pump that froze every January. I did not go to college. I poured concrete in the Texas heat when I was 19 years old with my shirt stuck to my back and my hands cracked open from the lime. I built Callaway Holdings from one pickup truck and a set of rusted tools into one of the largest privately held commercial real estate firms in the Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. I own office towers downtown. I own warehouses along I-35. I own pieces of land most people in this city drive past every single day without ever knowing my name is on the deed. And right there beside me, the entire 52 years of that climb, was Evelyn. She packed my lunch in a brown paper bag when we could not afford a plate lunch at the diner. She sat across from me in the kitchen at 2:00 in the morning doing the math on our first commercial deal by hand because we couldn't afford an accountant. Nobody, and I mean nobody, had ever raised a hand to that woman in 5 decades of marriage. Not until that night at the Stoneleigh Gardens estate just north of Highland Park. Now, before I tell you who hit her, I want you to sit with something for a second because I think this matters. If you have a person in your life who has walked through 50 years of your worst days and your best days without ever once betraying you, you understand how sacred that is. And when somebody touches that person the wrong way, something in you that has been sleeping for a long time wakes up. Mine woke up that night. The woman who hit Evelyn was named Sabrina Ashworth Vance. She was 27 years old. She had walked down the aisle exactly 48 minutes earlier and married my only son Preston in front of everyone we knew in North Texas. She stood over my wife with her arms crossed and her chin up in that practiced way rich girls practice in front of mirrors their whole lives, and she said loud enough that the waiters in the back heard her. She told Evelyn to get out, called her an old woman, said nobody wanted her there, said Evelyn was ruining her perfect day. Then she looked around at her bridesmaids with this little smirk like she genuinely expected applause. Let me tell you something about Sabrina and where she came from because this matters. Her family was from Houston originally, River Oaks address, and they called themselves Old Texas Oil Money. What they actually were was 3 generations of spent inheritance dressed up in a tailored jacket and a country club membership they were late paying dues on. Sabrina had done her little homework on our family, or thought she had. She knew I came up as a concrete contractor. She had decided, in that narrow little head of hers, that I was a lucky retiree with some modest investments and a son she could squeeze for a lifestyle. And I want to pause here for a second because I see this pattern all the time in the people who reach out to me about this story. There is a specific kind of person who looks at somebody who built themselves from nothing, and instead of respect, they feel entitled because in their little mental map, wealth only counts if it came with a last name attached and a summer house on the coast. Self-made money to them is still clear as throat, somehow lower. Keep that in your pocket. You'll see it in your own life if you haven't already. What Sabrina did not know What none of the Ashworth Vances knew was that the $5,000 a night luxury estate she had insisted on for the reception, the one she had fought her own mother about because it was the most exclusive venue north of Dallas, was owned by a Shell LLC registered to me personally through a holding subsidiary in Delaware. She had literally walked into my house to disrespect my wife. She just didn't know whose house she was standing in. I want you to really hear that because sometimes in life, the people who feel safest humiliating you are standing on ground you own. So I looked over at Preston, my son, 29 years old, standing less than a yard from the woman who had just struck his mother hard enough to draw blood, and I waited. I waited for him to step forward, to grab her wrist, to shove her back, to say one word, any word. I had carried that boy on my shoulders through the Texas State Fair when he was 4. I had worked double shifts in August heat for years so that boy would never know what an empty cupboard looks like. I sent him to Street Marks. I paid for Vanderbilt. I introduced him to the network that made his own little career possible, and I stood there with my heart pounding, begging him silently to be the man I raised. He looked at his shoes. His knuckles went white around the champagne flute in his hand. He never once lifted his head, and I want to stop the story right here because if you are still watching, that moment right there, that is the moment that matters more than anything else I'm going to tell you. 29 years of being his father burned down to powder in about 7 seconds, not because he made a mistake. Every man makes mistakes, but because in the defining moment of his whole life, with his mother bleeding on the marble in front of him, he picked his comfort over her dignity. And I'll say this to anybody out there listening. If somebody has to pick between your safety and their own convenience and they pick convenience, that person has already told you exactly who they are. Believe them the first time. I did not yell. I did not lunge at anybody. I will tell you this about men who built something from dirt. We do not throw tantrums in public. We calculate. I set my champagne flute on a passing waiter's tray. I walked across the marble, slow, steady, so everybody watching had time to really see me. I knelt down on my bad knee next to my wife, and I picked up the 3 broken pieces of her glasses so nobody would step on them. I took my pocket square out, and I pressed it to the cut on her cheekbone where the blood was running down, a cut made by Sabrina's engagement ring, the same ring I had paid $72,000 for 6 months earlier. Evelyn looked at me, and here is the thing about being married 52 years. Her face was perfectly calm, no tears, no outrage. She already knew what I was thinking. She put her hand on top of mine and she nodded one time once. That was the only permission I was ever going to need. I stood up. I looked Sabrina dead in her blue contact lenses and I took my phone out of my jacket pocket. I dialed one number. My wealth manager, Douglas, picked up on the first ring because he had been sitting by that phone since 5:00 that afternoon waiting on me. I said 3 words into that phone, execute Directive 0. Sabrina let out this little nervous laugh. I think she genuinely thought I was calling a car service. 10 seconds passed, maybe 12. Then every door in that ballroom locked shut from the outside at the same time. You could hear it, that heavy mechanical click all at once like a prison yard. The chandeliers cut out completely, black, the kind of darkness where you can hear 400 people breathing and nothing else. And when the backup lighting came on, it wasn't the warm gold of the crystal fixtures. It was the harsh industrial white you see inside a loading dock, and suddenly the room didn't look expensive anymore. It looked rented, which it was. The venue's operations manager, a man named Reginald Oates who had worked for my property management group for 11 years, walked out from the service corridor with a wireless microphone in his hand. He looked at me. I gave him one small nod. He tapped the mic twice, and he said, in a flat professional voice with no feeling in it at all, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to a complete and immediate payment failure, all services for this event are legally terminated effective now. This property is closed. You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises before Dallas County authorities arrive to process anyone remaining for criminal trespass." The room went from silent to full panic in about 3 seconds. Women in diamonds shrieking, men in custom tuxedos shouting at waitstaff. Sabrina standing in the middle of the dance floor with her jaw practically on the marble, spinning around trying to figure out what was actually happening to her. Preston pulled his phone out. No signal. The estate ran military-grade signal jamming for high-security corporate retreats, and Directive Zero had turned every single one of them on. He pulled out his wallet next. He was staring at the cards inside it, and I think somewhere in that exact second, some small back room of his brain finally understood. Every card he was holding was connected to money I had built, and I had just turned off all of it. If I'm being honest with you right here, watching that happen was not satisfying. I want to say it was. I want to tell you I felt powerful. I didn't. I felt tired. I felt like I had just watched something I spent my whole life building finally show its true shape. Evelyn and I did not go home that night. I had my driver take us directly to UT Southwestern Medical Center, and not only to treat the cut on her cheek, I needed documentation. Because here's a fact most people don't know. In the state of Texas, striking an adult who is 65 or older is not simple assault. It is classified as elder abuse. It becomes a third-degree felony the moment the medical documentation is filed with a licensed physician. A certified emergency room report with photographs and a doctor's signature is something no amount of old Houston money can make disappear. And if you're watching this and you have an elderly parent, I want you to write that down. Elder abuse laws exist in every state in the country. In Texas, Penal Code Chapter 22 specifically covers this. If somebody touches your mother, your father, your grandmother, that is not a family squabble. That is a felony. File the report. Get the photos. Do not let anybody talk you out of it. The charge nurse took us straight into a private exam room the moment she saw the blood on Evelyn's face. A young resident came in, cleaned the wound, and asked what had happened. I did not soften a single word. I told him exactly what occurred. I gave him Sabrina's full legal name. I described the context so he would chart everything correctly in the official record. A forensic nurse photographed the laceration from 5 angles with a calibrated camera used specifically for assault documentation. Every flash was another nail going into a legal wall that the Ashworth Vance family did not even know was being built around them. And while the resident was finishing the 2 stitches above Evelyn's cheekbone, my phone rang. Preston. He was not calling to ask if his mother was okay. He was at Dallas-Fort Worth International. He and Sabrina had been trying to board their honeymoon flight to Bora Bora, a trip I had paid for in full. First class out of DFW, private transfer from Papeete, an overwater villa for 21 nights. The airline had canceled the reservation in real time. The Admiral's Club had cut his membership card in half in front of him at the front desk. He was screaming into the phone that it was a glitch, demanding I call the airline immediately and fix it. I stepped into the hospital hallway. I let him go for a full 2 minutes without interrupting. Then I told him very quietly that there was no glitch. I had personally canceled every flight from the back of my car on the drive to the hospital. His corporate Amex was dead. His signature card on the holding account was frozen. His trust disbursement was suspended. Every pipeline he had access to was off. And then I told him the thing he really needed to hear. I told him the second he stood 3 feet from his mother bleeding on the marble and said nothing, he stopped being part of this family. And people who are not part of my family do not spend my money. He told me I was being unreasonable. He called what happened to his mother a stupid argument between women. Then he threatened me, told me he didn't need me. Told me he'd take a ride share back to his uptown penthouse and straighten everything out in the morning. I did not tell him the uptown penthouse was actually in the Callaway Holdings real estate portfolio. I did not tell him the biometric entry codes had already been changed 40 minutes earlier. I just ended the call and I blocked his number. I walked back into the exam room and I sat down on the little rolling stool next to Evelyn. She looked at me. I nodded once. She understood. The cord had been cut. And here's where I want to say something directly to anyone watching this who has a grown child they've supported too long. Financial support is not love. Let me say that again. Financial support is not love. Love has accountability in it. The minute you start paying for somebody's lifestyle in exchange for their silence when you are disrespected, you have not built a family. You have built a staff that resents you. By 2:00 in the morning, Sabrina had already posted a video. She and Preston had been locked out of the uptown penthouse exactly the way I planned, and they had driven to some tired motel off LBJ Freeway. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her mascara smudged just exactly right, her voice perfectly trembling. She told her 200,000 followers that my wife, Evelyn, had attacked her. She used every carefully coded phrase designed to paint my wife as the aggressor. She said the Calloway family was hostile to her. She said she acted in pure self-defense. She said the whole night had been a violent conspiracy against an innocent bride. Within 45 minutes, the clip had more than 1 million views. The comment section was vicious. Strangers calling Evelyn names I won't repeat in this story. People demanding charges be filed against a 74-year-old woman. And then I saw Preston's comment pinned at the top of the thread. Verified account, public. They're for every single person in the world to see. He said he stood with his wife. He said no woman should have to endure what Sabrina had suffered on her wedding day. I sat at my desk in the home office. I read those words 3 times, and I will not lie to you. Something inside my chest cracked in a way that did not crack when Sabrina hit Evelyn. Because when a stranger hits your wife, that is horror. But when your own son writes those words in public, that is grief. If you are watching this and you have ever been publicly betrayed by somebody you raised, I am sorry. I see you. I know that particular ache. But I want you to hear this. The betrayal does not mean you failed. It means you loved somebody who was not willing to become the person you tried to raise. Those are 2 very different things. What those millions of strangers watching Sabrina's video did not know was what Evelyn had actually seen exactly 1 hour before the ceremony started. She had gone up the back staircase to the bridal suite on the 3rd floor to personally deliver a family heirloom, a diamond and sapphire necklace my own grandmother had brought over from Scotland in 1937, a piece that was supposed to say, "Whatever our differences, Sabrina, you are now part of something real." Evelyn opened the suite door quietly. She did not find a nervous bride. She found Sabrina at the vanity mirror with 3 of her bridesmaids, a rolled-up $100 bill in her manicured hand, cocaine laid out in 4 clean lines across the glass surface of the vanity. Sabrina was laughing, telling her friends about the prenuptial agreement our attorneys had made her sign 2 weeks earlier. She said she had hired her own attorney, a specialist out of Chicago, who had found a loophole in the trust fund language. She said she only needed to stay married to Preston for 12 months, and then she could trigger a specific divorce clause worth $25 million. She called my son a stupid meal ticket. She called our whole family gullible. She called Evelyn a sad old woman desperate for grandchildren. Evelyn walked forward into that room very calmly. She set the velvet jewelry box down on the vanity next to the cocaine, and she stood there, quiet, waiting for Sabrina to notice her reflection in the mirror. When Sabrina finally did, she froze. The $100 bill dropped out of her fingers. Evelyn looked her dead in the eye and told her to wash her face, pack her bag, and leave the property quietly through the back service entrance. Evelyn said we would handle the cancellation with dignity. Evelyn said we would keep her drug use completely confidential out of respect for her mother, Miriam. Sabrina was high. Sabrina felt invincible. Sabrina walked downstairs in that $5,000 dress and forced the wedding to proceed anyway. When Evelyn quietly approached her later on the dance floor and tried to insist one last time that she stop, Sabrina panicked because she knew her $25 million payday was about to evaporate. So she struck first. She created chaos. She started the public narrative she was already planning to spin exactly the way she was now spinning it at 2:00 in the morning from a motel bed. She thought the viral video would pressure us into paying to make the scandal go away. She thought we were soft people who would write a check rather than fight in public. She had no idea, not one idea, what was actually coming for her. And I want to say something here because I think it needs to be said out loud. A person who builds a plan like that, a person who can stand at a vanity mirror with cocaine in her hand and laugh about robbing a family, is not a misguided girl. She is not a product of poor circumstances. She is a predator. And I want you watching this to understand that predators dress up as victims faster than anybody else can dress up as anything because victimhood is their shield. The next morning at 9:00 sharp, my attorney, Nathaniel Crane, walked into my office with a thick stack of papers. Sabrina and her father, Gerald Ashworth Vance, had filed a $10 million civil lawsuit against me and Evelyn overnight. Emotional distress, false imprisonment from the locked doors at the venue, defamation of character. Their demand letter made it absolutely clear that if I did not settle quickly, the viral video was just the opening move of a full media campaign targeting my business reputation across Texas. I read through the whole stack of papers slowly. Then I set them down on my desk, and I actually smiled because they had just handed me the exact legal opening I needed. We met the following morning in Nathaniel's offices on the 48th floor of a tower I owned through a subsidiary down on Ross Avenue. Preston and Sabrina walked in 20 minutes late. That was a cheap power move they had clearly rehearsed. They brought along a litigator wearing a loud pinstripe suit with a pocket watch chain and a cologne you could smell from the elevator. He walked like a man who had already cashed his contingency fee in his head. Sabrina sat down across from me, crossed her legs, and told Nathaniel she was generously willing to make this entire situation go away. She said she would accept a personal settlement of $10 million for her suffering. She said the remaining $40 million of Preston's inheritance should be released immediately into a joint account in both their names so they could start their life. She actually used the word suffering with a straight face. Nathaniel did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He simply slid one single manila folder across the conference table, and he told them to please read page 1 carefully. Here's what Preston and Sabrina did not know. Preston had never owned that money, not $1 of it, not one penny. The Calloway Family Trust was structured as a fully discretionary, generation-skipping, irrevocable trust, meaning Evelyn and I, as the sole trustees, held absolute and unilateral control over every distribution. Preston was listed as a discretionary beneficiary, which is a legal term that basically means he received whatever we felt like giving him, whenever we felt like giving it, nothing more. He had no legal right to demand a payout. He had no right to borrow against the principal. He had no right to assign, transfer, or promise a single dollar to any spouse. Under Texas trust law, his future wife had exactly zero community property claim on that money. I watched the color drain out of my son's face in real time. I watched his eyes move across the language on page 4, and I saw him understand, maybe for the first time in his adult life, that everything he had been telling people at parties about his $50 million inheritance had been a story he told himself to feel important. He had built an entire identity around the money. He drove cars he could not afford. He lived in a penthouse he did not own. He moved through Highland Park and Preston Hollow society pretending to be a Texas heir, and he was finding out, in a boardroom with a ceramic coffee cup rattling in his hand, that none of it had ever legally been his. Now, here is something I want to say to anyone listening who is thinking about leaving money to adult children. Do not ever, 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 ever tell a child what is coming to them. Do not give them a number. Do not give them a year. Because the moment you do, they start spending it in their minds. And once they start spending it in their minds, they stop becoming the kind of person who could actually handle it. Sabrina's litigator tried to pivot. He started talking about Texas community property, marital rights. He said he'd drag this through family court for the next 7 years. Nathaniel just flipped the folder calmly to page 47. He placed his gold fountain pen on one specific paragraph that was highlighted in yellow. Section 8, the Morality and Conduct Clause. Any physical harm inflicted on either grantor, meaning me or Evelyn, by a beneficiary or the legally wedded spouse of a beneficiary, triggered immediate and permanent disinheritance. No trustee vote required, no arbitration, no grace period, no appeal. The clause had activated the instant Sabrina's palm connected with Evelyn's cheekbone in front of 400 witnesses at Stoneleigh Gardens. Preston's access to the trust was gone before the blood had even dried on Evelyn's face. The litigator stopped talking mid-sentence. He read the clause, he read it again. He looked up at Nathaniel. Then he very quietly closed his briefcase, pushed his chair back from the conference table, stood up, nodded at nobody in particular, and walked out of the room. He had taken the case expecting a soft family desperate to avoid bad press. Instead, he was staring at an airtight legal wall backed by a hospital report, a forensic nurse exam, 400 witnesses, and high-definition surveillance footage. And that's when something really interesting happened. Sabrina turned to Preston and the mask came off, completely. The composed, weeping, wronged wife act she had been performing all morning disappeared the second her attorney left the room. She leaned toward Preston and her voice dropped into something much lower and much colder. She wanted to know why in the hell he had never told her the trust was discretionary. Preston tried to stammer out that he genuinely thought the money would come to him eventually. That's how he had been raised to talk about it. She was not interested. She stood up. She grabbed her crocodile handbag. She walked out of that conference room without another word to my son. Preston sat there at the table alone for almost a full minute. The only sound was the ventilation system. He looked up at me for the first time all morning. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. I did not give him anything. No anger, no satisfaction, no comfort. I looked at him the way you look at a stranger asking for directions on the street. Then I gathered my papers. I put them back in my leather portfolio and I walked out. If I'm being honest, that was one of the hardest moments of my life, because part of me wanted to pull him into a hug and tell him everything was going to be fine. But love is not softness. Real love knows when softness is the wrong medicine, and my son did not need softness in that room. He needed to feel the weight of what he had allowed. Now, here is what Preston did not know yet. Here is what Sabrina certainly did not know. I had been planning the second half of this for almost 3 full months before the wedding even happened. When Preston first brought Sabrina home for Thanksgiving and announced the engagement over the turkey, something in my gut went wrong immediately. Not the kind of wrong you can explain at a dinner table. The kind of wrong you feel after 40 years of negotiating deals with people who smile at you while they're counting the cash in your wallet. I hired the most thorough private investigator in the state of Texas, a former FBI white-collar crime guy named Desmond who owed me a favor. I paid him to go deep, not surface, deep. He came back 9 days later with a file thicker than I expected. Gerald Ashworth Vance's logistics and regional trucking company had been quietly bleeding cash for 6 years. He ran his operations on outdated routing software. He refused to modernize the fleet. He refused to hire a real CFO. And to keep up appearances, the River Oaks address, the country club dues at River Crest, the summer trips to Mykonos, the daughter's lifestyle. He had taken out roughly $16.2 million in high-interest, short-term corporate loans from 3 regional commercial banks. He was standing on a trap door. All it needed was somebody to pull the lever. Over a quiet 3-week window, through a proxy hedge fund registered in Delaware, with absolutely zero public connection to my name or to Callaway Holdings, I reached out to those 3 banks. They were desperate to clear the bad paper off their books before Gerald's company officially went under and took their year-end reports with it. They sold me every single one of those loans for about 38 cents on the dollar. They never once knew who the real buyer was. By the time Sabrina walked down that aisle in her 5-figure dress, I already owned Gerald Ashworth Vance's entire financial future. I owned the man who called my son street trash at his own country club. He just didn't know it yet. After the boardroom meeting, I instructed Nathaniel to issue a formal margin call through the Delaware Proxy Fund. Gerald had 48 hours. $16.2 million wired to the holding account, or I would execute a full hostile takeover of every asset he owned. The company, the River Oaks mansion, the ranch in Fredericksburg, all of it. Gerald showed up at my office that same evening. Less than 14 hours later, the man who had stood in the grill room at River Oaks Country Club and called my Sun Street trash was now riding the elevator up to my floor with a paper cup of gas station coffee in his shaking hand. My assistant, Marguerite, made him sit in the glass waiting area for 25 minutes before she opened my door. I wanted the silence and the view of downtown Dallas from the 40th floor to work on him before he ever sat down across from me. When he finally walked in, I did not offer him a seat. I did not offer him water. I stood behind my desk and I waited. He tried to start with dignity. He called me Henry like we were old friends. He said there had been a regrettable misunderstanding between our two families. He blamed the stress of the wedding for the things he had said and done. He placed his hands flat on the edge of my desk and asked me to please be reasonable. He talked about his employees, over 400 of them, truck drivers, dispatchers, warehouse staff, men with mortgages in Pasadena and Pearland who had kids in college. He talked about the River Oaks house, 4 generations of Ashworths in that house. He said it would destroy his wife Miriam if they lost it. He asked for 6 months. He promised on his name that he would pay back every cent with full interest. I let him finish. Then I told him what I wanted. I did not want his company. I did not want a seat on his board. I did not want his money. I wanted Sabrina on camera within 24 hours, posted to every single social media platform she had used to spread lies about my wife. In that video, she would tell the truth, all of it, the cocaine in the bridal suite, the plan to divorce Preston after 12 months and take $25 million, the fact that she was the one who struck Evelyn first, unprovoked, in front of 400 witnesses. Full confession, no softening, no excuses, and after the video she would sign an annulment document, full waiver of all marital rights, no alimony, no division of assets, no claim of any kind. She would walk out of this marriage with exactly what she brought into it, which, as it turned out, was almost nothing. If she did that, I would restructure his $16.2 million debt into a manageable 12-year payment plan at reasonable interest. He would keep the company. He would keep the mansion. He would keep his name. Gerald did not argue. He did not try to negotiate a single word of it. He picked up the annulment packet with both hands like it was heavier than it looked, and he walked out of my office faster than he had walked in. Now, while Gerald was driving back to his River Oaks home to deliver that ultimatum to his daughter, Sabrina had already made her next move. Because predators do not give up. They pivot. She walked into a Dallas police substation on Cedar Springs and filed a sworn affidavit claiming I had sent armed men to threaten her at the motel the night of the wedding. She figured if she could get me arrested for witness intimidation, I would settle immediately to make the criminal case disappear. 2 plainclothes detectives showed up at my front gate in Preston Hollow at 7:30 that evening. I invited them in. I offered them coffee in the kitchen. I walked them back to my private study and I showed them everything. The security footage was captured by military-grade 4K cameras I have installed across every single property I own, including the bridal suite at Stoneleigh Gardens, which is standard for high-security luxury events because of jewelry theft. The bridal suite feed was crystal clear. You could hear every word Sabrina said to her bridesmaids. You could see the cocaine on the vanity. You could see the rolled 100 in her hand. You could hear her laughing about the 12-month plan. You could hear her call my son a meal ticket. Then the ballroom feed. Evelyn walking quietly toward the dance floor. Sabrina crossing the room with clear intent. The strike itself captured from 4 simultaneous camera angles synchronized to a single timestamp. And then, just seconds after the strike, the enhanced audio picked up Sabrina leaning over to her mother Miriam and whispering, word for word, that she was going to tell the police Evelyn hit her first so they could sue for millions. The older detective, a guy named Ramirez, set his coffee cup down on my desk. He asked if he could take the USB drive as state's evidence. I told him to keep it. 20 minutes after those detectives walked out of my study, a Dallas County District judge signed an emergency arrest warrant. They found Sabrina at the Dallas Country Club on the outdoor terrace during the lunch rush, sitting at a shaded table with 4 of her sorority sisters from SMU. She was in full performance mode, dabbing her eyes with a linen napkin, telling the story of her ruined wedding to a captive audience who believed every single word. She had a mimosa in her hand, and the face of a woman who was completely certain nobody in the world could touch her. She saw the 2 detectives come through the mahogany French doors from the dining room, and she actually smiled. I'm told by someone who was there that she stood up. She smoothed her dress down. She extended her hand toward them because she assumed they had come to inform her that I was in custody. The older detective did not take her hand. He asked her to please confirm her full legal name. When she did, he unclipped the stainless steel handcuffs from his belt, and the sound of that metal in the quiet of the country club terrace made every conversation at every table within 30 feet stop cold. He read the voice that carried across every single table on that terrace: felony elder abuse, filing a false police report, perjury, possession of a Schedule II narcotic. Sabrina started shaking her head before he finished the first charge. By the third one, she was gripping the edge of the wrought iron table so hard her knuckles went white. By the fourth, she was screaming, not the little delicate tears she had used in her social media video. This was something raw, ugly, completely out of control. Her sorority sisters pushed their chairs back. Nobody reached for her. Nobody said a word in her defense. The detectives pulled her arms behind her back. They locked the cuffs. They walked her across the full length of the terrace, through the center of the dining room, past every single person she had been performing for. Her heels scraped against the flagstone. Her hair came loose from its pins. The $4,000 dress she had worn to project untouchability was twisted and stained by the time they got her through the front valet doors. Preston was standing in the parking lot when they brought her out. He had come there to beg her to take him back. He had not yet learned anything. He watched them push her into the back of an unmarked Crown Victoria and drive her away toward the county jail. He stood alone on that asphalt in the Texas heat, holding Sabrina's designer purse, which one of her sorority sisters had shoved into his chest on her way out of the club without saying a word. The phone inside the purse was unlocked, and the text messages glowing on the screen were from a man named Blake Harrington Shaw. Preston scrolled through those messages standing in that parking lot, alone, holding his ex-wife's purse, looking, I am told, like a man who had just woken up from a very long dream and did not recognize the country he was standing in. Blake Harrington Shaw was one of the groomsmen from the wedding. Sabrina had always introduced him as an old childhood friend from Houston. The messages told a completely different story. They had planned the entire marriage together. Blake had been the one who connected Sabrina with the Chicago attorney who specialized in exploiting trust fund structures. Sabrina had laid out the whole scheme in detail across hundreds of messages over 16 months. 12 months of marriage, trigger the divorce clause, walk away with $25 million, buy a villa in Saint-Tropez, meet Blake in Europe. She had sent Blake a photograph of herself in her wedding dress at 6:00 that evening, 1 hour before the ceremony, with a caption that said she was putting on her work uniform to go rob the bank. She had never loved Preston, not for one single day. She said so plainly in her own words, in message after message going back a full year before the engagement was ever announced. Preston stood in that parking lot and read every single one of those messages. I know exactly what happened next because an old college roommate of his named Marcus was with him. Marcus was somebody Preston had completely cut off from his life because Sabrina had decided he was not the right kind of person for their social circle. He drove a Ford Ranger. He worked in HVAC. He did not summer anywhere. Preston had swallowed that, too, along with everything else, trying to fit into a world that was never going to accept him no matter how much of my money he spent on appearances. Marcus drove him around Dallas for about 3 hours with no destination. At some point, around 6:00 in the evening, Preston asked to be taken to our gate in Preston Hollow. It was raining hard by then, the kind of fast-moving Texas thunderstorm that comes down off the plains in April and rattles the windows. I was sitting in my study going through Nathaniel's final paperwork on the annulment when the motion sensor on the front gate monitor lit up on my desk screen. I watched Preston get out of that beat-up Red Ranger in the pouring rain. He walked up to the iron bars. He grabbed them with both hands. He looked straight up into the security camera. He knew exactly where I was. He talked for a long time. He told me he had seen the messages on Sabrina's phone. He told me he finally understood what she had been from the very beginning. He said he was sorry for what happened in the ballroom. He said he had frozen. He said he didn't know what to do. He dropped to his knees on the wet asphalt and begged me to open the gate. Evelyn came into the study quietly while he was still talking. She stood behind my leather chair. She looked at the screen. She did not ask me to press the button. She put her hands on my shoulders and she stood there with me in silence. I pressed the intercom. I told my son that an apology that only arrives after you have lost everything is not really an apology. It is a receipt. I told him that figuring out Sabrina was a con artist only after she had been arrested for felony assault did not make him a victim. It made him a willing participant who did not ask any real questions. I told him that a man who watches his own mother bleed and says nothing is no son of mine. Then I said, "Preston, walk away." And I cut the feed. I turned the monitor off. Evelyn leaned down and put her hand over mine without saying a word. We sat there together in the quiet of that study while the Texas rain came down outside the window. I want to tell you that was easy. It was not. I cried that night for the first time since my own father died in 1984. I cried because I loved that boy. I still love that boy, but love without standards is not love. It is bribery, and I was done bribing him. The 48-hour deadline on Gerald's margin call expired the next morning. Nothing had been wired. I authorized Nathaniel to begin the full hostile takeover immediately. By noon the next day, Gerald's logistics company was under new ownership. By 4:00 in the afternoon, a Harris County Sheriff's deputy had served eviction papers at the River Oaks mansion. Gerald and Miriam Ashworth Vance were photographed by a local news crew loading black contractor trash bags into the trunk of a rented Hyundai Sonata and driving north out of Houston before federal investigators arrived with Hyundai Sonata but went town warrants. Because here's the thing. The forensic accountants I had sent into Gerald's company during the takeover had uncovered 6 full years of tax evasion and 2 offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I handed every single document to the IRS and to the Southern District of Texas that same afternoon. The River Oaks mansion was transferred to a nonprofit foundation I set up within 72 hours. Today that house is a community center and tutoring facility for at-risk youth in inner-city Houston. The grand ballroom where Gerald used to host his oil industry friends is now a computer lab with 40 workstations for teenagers from 3rd Ward and 5th Ward. The formal garden outback is a working greenhouse that teaches kids how to grow food. The Ashworth Vance family name has been permanently removed from the property. 3 months later, the criminal trial lasted a total of 2 days. The jury deliberated for under 90 minutes, guilty on all 4 felony counts. The judge sentenced Sabrina to 36 months in a Texas state correctional facility with no early parole and mandatory completion of a substance abuse program. When the bailiffs put the cuffs on her in that courtroom, she screamed for Gerald to come save her. The benches behind the defense table were completely empty. Her father had already fled the country. Last I heard, he and Miriam are renting a small apartment in Cozumel. Evelyn and I walked out of that courthouse together. We went home. 6 months have passed now. We sit on the porch most afternoons. The bluebonnets were out this spring. The estate is quiet in a way that only comes after something has been resolved completely. We rewrote our entire legacy. Every single asset now goes into a charitable blind trust the day we die. full 4-year scholarships for underprivileged students across the state of Texas, zero-interest startup capital for minority entrepreneurs trying to build something from nothing exactly the way Evelyn and I once did. Our money will build futures. It will not fund entitlement. And here's what I want to say to anyone watching this who is sitting on that kind of decision right now. The people who built you did not sacrifice so you could fund the people who tear you down. You are not obligated to hand your life's work to somebody just because they share your blood. Legacy is a choice, not a reflex. Last week, a UPS truck came up the drive and stopped at the gate. Preston stepped out. He was wearing a faded brown uniform, steel-toed boots worn down from real work. He was carrying a package. He walked up to the stone pillar, set the package down, looked up at the camera, and gave one slow nod. No begging, no performance. Then he walked back to his truck and drove away to finish his route. I did not open the gate, but I did not look away either. I watched until the truck was completely gone. Because stripping away everything I had given that boy was the hardest single decision I ever made as a father. And I will be honest with you. I still believe it was the only honest thing left I could do for him. He is out there right now learning what $1 actually costs, learning what it means to earn something instead of inherit it. That is not punishment. That is the only education that was ever going to stick. If you have been sitting on disrespect inside your own family, if somebody in your house has been taking your kindness as weakness for years now, and you have been waiting for the right moment to say something or do something about it, I want you to really hear me right now. You are not obligated to keep funding the people who treat you like a resource. Blood is biology, loyalty is a choice, and peace that is built on your own silence is just a slow leak draining everything you worked your whole life to build. Respect has to cost something. If it does not cost anybody anything to take it from you, they will keep on taking it. This story teaches us that dignity is not given. Dignity is defended. The mistake most people make is thinking that keeping the peace means staying quiet while they are disrespected. That is not peace. That is surrender with better manners. Here is my action step for you today. Before you go to bed tonight, I want you to write down one boundary that you have been letting somebody in your family cross for too long. Just one. Write it on a piece of paper, and then ask yourself this question. If I do not defend this boundary, who will? If you are in the United States and you have an elderly parent being mistreated, you can call the Adult Protective Services hotline in your state. Every state has one. It is free. It is confidential. You do not need proof, you just need concern. In Texas specifically, you can reach out to the Department of Family and Protective Services. They have a 24-hour intake line. Please save that number in your phone tonight. Now, before I close this out, I want to hear from you. Comment the number 1 if you think I did the right thing by cutting Preston off completely. Comment the number 2 if you think the family should have forgiven him faster and kept him closer. Comment the number 3 if you have ever lived through something similar where somebody you raised stood silent while you were disrespected. And below that, tell me where you are watching this from. What city? What country? What time is it where you are right now? I read every single comment. I love hearing from you from every corner of the world. And if this story hit close to home for you today, share it with one person who needed to hear it tonight. All names, places, and details are fictional. Any resemblance to real events is coincidental. If you like this story, please hit that like button, clears throat, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. There are more stories coming. And every single one of them is about somebody who finally decided they were done being quiet. I'll see you in the next one.